The city was quiet in the late afternoon, but the street still carried a hum of life. Shadows stretched along the walls and the air smelled faintly of rain and the river. In a small, cozy cafe near the harbor, the soft glow of lanterns illuminated wooden tables worn but polished from years of use. Outside, mist drifted across the cobblestone streets. Inside, the cafe was warm, a refuge from the chill. Ilara moved among the tables with quiet grace. Her brown hair was tied back simply, and her apron carried the faint scent of coffee and bread. She smiled gently at the few customers scattered across the room. Her hands moved with ease, lifting cups and plates, pouring coffee with careful precision, but the real magic of her presence was not in her service. It was in the way she seemed to notice people, to understand them without words. It was then that Dorian Valenti entered the cafe. He was a man of tall stature, broad shoulders, and dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the world. His suit was tailored perfectly, expensive but unassuming, yet it carried a weight of authority that made others instinctively step aside. Dorian did not speak loudly. He did not need to. His presence alone commanded attention. He came here often, though not for coffee. Business meetings, small arrangements, sometimes to observe the city he ruled quietly from behind the scenes. Today, however, something caught his attention almost immediately as he stepped in. Near the back of the cafe, kneeling beside a woman with silver hair and gentle features, was Ilara. She was signing to her with her hands, her fingers moving with precision and warmth. Dorian's mother, Isolde, was deaf. She rarely laughed, rarely spoke, and often sat in silence, watching the world with distant eyes. Yet now her face was soft and bright, her eyes dancing with joy. Dorian froze at the sight. He had never expected to see anyone make his mother smile like this, not in years. The way Ilara moved, the way she looked at his mother with patience and care, it stirred something unfamiliar inside him. A knot of curiosity, concern, and a sudden, undeniable longing. He stood near the doorway, hidden in the shadow of the entrance, watching. He could feel his pulse quicken, a sensation he rarely experienced. Usually he controlled everything, people, plans, the city, but this woman, this waitress, moved his heart in ways he did not understand. Ilara laughed softly, a sound full of warmth that seemed to fill the space around them. She signed something to Isolde, and the older woman's smile widened. Dorian's chest tightened. He had spent years building walls around himself. He had ruled with fear, power, and precision. Yet here was someone who could reach a part of him he thought was buried forever. The moment ended too quickly. Ilara straightened and began to serve a nearby table. Isolde watched her with gratitude and a gentle wave. Dorian stepped back, unsure whether to approach or remain hidden. His instincts, sharp and precise, told him to act, to protect. But another, softer voice inside him whispered caution. He lingered for a few more minutes, studying her. Ilara's movements were natural, effortless. She smiled at customers, not in the way people smiled to please, but in a way that made them feel seen, valued. Dorian felt a strange ache, one he could not name. Finally, he left the cafe quietly, not wanting to be noticed. Outside, the mist curled around the street lamps, and he could hear the distant sound of the river lapping against the harbor. His mind was already turning, considering possibilities. He did not know this woman's name, her story, or even if he should involve himself. Yet the pull was undeniable. Back at his estate, a large, dark mansion overlooking the harbor, Dorian walked the halls with his hands behind his back. The chandeliers reflected light off polished floors, casting shifting patterns along the walls. His mother sat in her favorite chair, silent, watching him. "Mother," he said softly, "I saw her today." Isolde tilted her head, curious. "Who?" "The waitress at the cafe," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "The one who spoke to you?" In sign language. A small smile touched her lips. "Ah, yes," she said. "She is kind." Dorian nodded, pacing the room slowly. He had spent his life ensuring that nothing and no one threatened his family or his power. He had controlled everything, people, deals, even enemies. But this was different. Something inside him wanted to protect this woman, to ensure that no harm came to her. "I want her protected," he said finally, his voice firm. Not as a suggestion, but as a command. His lieutenant, Marco, standing silently near the door, nodded immediately. "Understood," Marco said. "No one will touch her." Dorian's mind, however, was already racing. Protection alone would not be enough. In his world, threats came from every shadow. Rivals, enemies, and the city itself could reach anyone at any time. He needed to know more about her life, her habits, and her connections. And yet he could not decide if he should approach her openly. Doing so might frighten her or worse, put her in danger. Meanwhile, Ilara returned home after her shift. The small apartment she rented above a quiet bakery was modest but warm. She hung her coat and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She had no idea that the man she had noticed in the cafe, a figure watching quietly from the doorway, had been the most powerful and feared man in the city. She thought only of his mother. There was something unusual in her eyes when she spoke with Ilara. Trust, perhaps, or recognition of her kindness. Ilara's heart had always leaned toward helping others, even strangers. She had grown up understanding that gestures, no matter how small, could change lives. That night, as the city slept under the blanket of mist and lamplight, Dorian stood in his study, looking at the harbor. His mind replayed the moments at the cafe over and over. The way she had signed, the patience in her movements, the joy she had brought to his mother, it all pressed against the walls he had built around himself. He knew danger might come. People would notice if he lingered too long in his thoughts, if he acted on feelings that were considered weaknesses in his world. Yet he could not let go. He could not forget the way Ilara had made his mother smile. The next day, Dorian returned to the cafe. This time he stayed longer, sitting in a quiet corner observing her as she worked. He did not approach yet. He wanted to understand, to see who she truly was, and he wanted to see if her kindness extended beyond the brief interaction with his mother. Ilara noticed him this time. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She felt a strange chill, not fear, but an unexplainable awareness. Something about him was different from other men she had seen. There was power, yes, but also something hidden. A vulnerability, almost, that she could not place. Dorian's gaze softened slightly as he observed her. He realized that protection alone was not enough. He wanted to ensure her safety personally, but even as he made this decision, he knew that entering her life openly could complicate things. His enemies were always watching, always waiting for a moment to strike. He left again silently, blending into the mist outside the cafe. But this time he felt something deeper, a connection that went beyond duty or curiosity. It was rare for him to feel anything beyond control and calculation, and yet he could not deny it. Back at the mansion, he told Marco again, more firmly this time. Do whatever is necessary. Keep her safe. No one touches her. Not for any reason. Marco nodded. Consider it done. Dorian walked to the window, looking out at the dark water of the harbor. His mind was restless.
He could not stop thinking about her.
Her smile, her hands, the way she had reached his mother in a way no one else could. The world outside was dangerous, cruel, and unkind, but he would ensure she remained untouched by it. Somehow. And then he thought of a possibility that made him uneasy but alive. What if protecting her was more than a duty? What if it was the first step towards something he had not felt in years? Something he dared not name yet but could not ignore. For now, all he could do was watch, wait, and plan, and hope that in doing so, he could keep her safe from the darkness that always lurked nearby. As the night deepened, Dorian's mansion stood silent against the city's mist. The harbor reflected the pale glow of the moon, and somewhere in the distance a bell rang. He knew that the world was never truly quiet for long, and that the danger surrounding Ilara had only just begun. But in the quiet, he allowed himself one thought, one truth. He wanted her protected. Not only for his mother, but perhaps for himself as well. And that desire, fragile and dangerous, was the first spark of a story that was just beginning. The next morning, the city was alive with activity. Vendors called out their wares. The smell of fresh bread mixed with the salt from the harbor, and carriages clattered along the cobblestone streets. Ilara moved among the tables at the cafe, carrying trays of coffee and pastries with practiced ease. Her hands were steady, her smile calm, but there was an undercurrent of thoughtfulness in her gaze. She couldn't stop thinking about the man she had noticed yesterday, the tall, dark-eyed stranger who had watched her quietly. She shook her head softly. He was probably just another customer, yet something about his presence felt different, strong, important, and there was a heaviness in his eyes, a look that suggested he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. She had seen powerful men before, but there was a quiet restraint about him, a controlled energy that made her curious but careful. Meanwhile, across the city, Dorian Valenti was already at work. His office, high in a stone building overlooking the harbor, was filled with maps, ledgers, and phones that never stopped ringing. His world was one of power, rules, and constant vigilance. Business came first, always. But even amid his responsibilities, his mind returned to Alara. He had arranged discreet protection for her, sending trusted aides to watch the cafe and the streets she frequented. No one knew who she was, and she had no idea that she was now at the center of his attention. He wanted to keep it that way. For her safety, for her freedom, and perhaps for something deeper he dared not name. Dorian's Lieutenant Marco appeared at his office door carrying a small report. "All positions are in place," he said. "No one is near her that shouldn't be. She is safe." Dorian nodded, his jaw tight. "Good, keep it that way. And check the surroundings every hour. Do not let anyone get close without my knowledge." Marco hesitated for a moment, sensing the unusual intensity in Dorian's tone. "Sir, this goes beyond a normal protection assignment." "I know," Dorian said quietly. "I want her watched, but not in a way that she notices. If anyone threatens her, I want them gone. Permanently." Marco inclined his head. He understood exactly what was at stake. Dorian Valenti did not give orders lightly. If he said permanently, it meant danger would meet consequence swiftly. Back at the cafe, Alara wiped down a table and straightened her apron. She glanced toward the window, sensing a presence outside. But when she looked more closely, the streets seemed empty. Yet the feeling lingered, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. She shook her head and returned to her work, telling herself she was imagining things. Later that day, as the lunch crowd thinned, Dorian entered the cafe once more. This time he did not stay in the shadows. He walked slowly, deliberately toward the counter where Alara was arranging silverware. She looked up and met his gaze. Their eyes locked for a moment. She felt the same strange awareness she had felt yesterday. Something about him was undeniable. His presence, his strength, and the sense of danger hidden beneath a calm exterior. She smiled politely, unsure why her heart was suddenly racing. "Hello," he said softly, his voice smooth but commanding. "Hello," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. He leaned slightly closer, resting one hand on the counter. "You helped my mother yesterday. I wanted to thank you." Alara's hands paused mid-arrangement. "Your mother? Oh, yes, she is lovely," she said, unsure how much to reveal. "She is," Dorian said, his dark eyes scanning her face. "And you. You made her happy. That is not something many people can do." Alara's cheeks warmed. I just like to help. It is nothing special." Dorian tilted his head, studying her. "It is very special. To see someone care without expecting anything in return, it is rare." They fell into a brief silence, both aware of an unspoken tension growing between them. Outside the window, a shadow moved along the street. Unnoticed by either of them, a reminder that the world was never safe. Not for him, not for her. As Dorian left the cafe, he knew he could not remain distant much longer. Every time he saw her, every moment she smiled or moved gracefully through the room, it made him realize how unusual his feelings were. He had always controlled his emotions, kept people at a distance. But with Alara, he could not. That evening, back at his mansion, Dorian spoke to his mother. Isolde sat in her favorite chair, watching the fire glow softly. "Mother," he began, "I want you to know. I am making sure she is safe. No one will harm her." Isolde's eyes softened and she reached out her hand. "You care for her." Dorian hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I cannot explain it, but I feel responsible. I cannot let anything happen to her." "Then trust yourself," Isolde said gently. "She is kind and she will be part of our lives if you allow it." Dorian stared into the fire, his mind racing. Allowing someone close was foreign to him. But the idea of keeping her at a distance now seemed impossible. The following days brought more tension. Dorian's enemies began to notice his distraction, subtle hints that he was not as focused as usual. Rumors spread that someone had caught his attention. A simple mistake could cost lives, and in Dorian's world, mistakes were never forgiven. Alara, unaware of the attention she had drawn, continued her work at the cafe. She noticed minor changes, the way certain men lingered outside, the occasional shadow at the corner of her vision. but she dismissed it as imagination. Still, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, pressing at the edges of her calm life. One afternoon, as Alara carried a tray to a table near the window, a man stepped forward abruptly. He blocked her path, his eyes dark and calculating. "Hey, we need to talk," he said. Alara froze. Her instincts told her danger was near, yet she remained calm. I don't know you," she said, keeping her voice steady. The man smiled faintly, but it did not reach his eyes. "That doesn't matter. You'll come with me." Before he could move closer, Dorian stepped from the shadows outside, his presence overwhelming. The man froze as Dorian's dark eyes locked onto him. In a voice both quiet and deadly, Dorian said, "Step away. Now." The man's bravado faltered, and he retreated quickly, disappearing into the mist outside. Alara blinked, startled. Who are you?" Dorian did not answer immediately. Instead, he held her gaze, calm and commanding. "No one will harm you, ever. You are under my protection." Alara's heart raced, but she sensed no threat from him, only something intense, powerful, and unshakable. I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," Dorian said quietly. "In time you will understand. For now, trust me." That night, as Alara walked home, the city felt both familiar and strange. She sensed danger, yet there was also a strange reassurance in the knowledge that someone powerful watched over her. She could not name it, but a small part of her felt safe for the first time in years. Dorian returned to his mansion, his mind restless. The encounter at the cafe had confirmed something he already feared. He could not ignore Alara. She had entered his world quietly, yet she had left a mark he could not erase. He walked to the balcony overlooking the harbor, the mist curling around the water below. His thoughts returned to her smile, the gentle way she moved, the kindness in her eyes. He had controlled everything in his life, from deals to family, from enemies to friends, but he could not control this feeling. Marco appeared quietly behind him. "Sir, she is safe, and the men who approached her are gone." Dorian nodded. "Good, but safety is not enough. I need to know more about her. About her life, her habits, everything." "Understood," Marco said. "I will gather information discreetly." Dorian's dark eyes returned to the water. Protecting her was only the beginning. The city was full of dangers, and his enemies would see her as leverage. He could not allow that. Not now, not ever. And yet amid the danger a spark had begun. A spark that would not be extinguished. It was a dangerous, thrilling, and fragile connection, and Dorian knew that the path ahead would test them both in ways neither could yet imagine. The night deepened, wrapping the city in mist and silence. Somewhere, the distant bell of a harbor clock echoed, reminding him that time moved forward, and so did destiny. For Dorian and Alara, the story was only beginning. And in the quiet, he allowed himself one thought. She was no longer just a stranger or a person to be protected. She was someone he could not ignore, someone who had already touched a part of him he had long thought lost. The city lay quiet under a pale moon, mist curling around the streets and harbor. The distant sound of water lapping against the docks was soothing, yet in Dorian Valenti's mind there was no rest. Every shadow in the city could hide danger, and every whisper could carry a threat. He had protected Alara before discreetly, but now he realized that protecting her would not be enough. He needed her to be safe, and he needed to understand her, to ensure that the connection forming between them would survive the chaos of his world. Alara, meanwhile, walked home slowly from the cafe. The streets were empty, and the mist brushed lightly against her face. Her mind was restless, filled with thoughts of the mysterious man who had stepped in to save her. He had appeared quietly, power in his presence, but there had been no arrogance. Only focus. A focus entirely on her safety. She could not stop thinking about him, yet she did not understand why. The following day, Dorian returned to the cafe. He approached the counter carefully, his movements calm but his eyes sharp. Alara noticed him immediately and felt a strange flutter in her chest. She had grown accustomed to watching shadows, sensing potential danger. But he did not feel like danger. He felt intense, like a storm held just at the edge of control. "You are here again," she said softly, a small smile touching her lips. "I wanted to see you," Dorian said quietly. His voice carried a calm authority, but underneath it something more personal, a concern, a longing. Alara paused, unsure what to say. I thank you. For yesterday, she whispered. I don't understand why. Why you helped me. Dorian's dark eyes softened. Because you deserve it. And because I cannot let anything happen to you. Her cheeks warmed. You don't even know me? She said gently. No, he admitted. I do not. But I intend to learn. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside. Ilara's instincts went on alert. She glanced toward the street and saw figures moving quickly in the mist. Shadowy men with a clear purpose. Her heart raced. Dorian noticed her tension immediately. Without hesitation, he moved to the door, positioning himself between her and the threat. His presence alone made the men hesitate. His reputation, though unknown to Ilara, carried weight in every dark corner of the city. You should not have come here, he said to the men quietly, but there was an edge to his voice that brooked no argument. The men exchanged uneasy glances and retreated quickly, disappearing into the fog. Dorian turned to Ilara, placing a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. Are you unharmed? Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Thanks to you. You do not need to thank me, he said softly. Just stay close, always. After that day, the bond between them grew. Dorian arranged for protection that was discreet but constant. Ilara, sensing that something unusual was happening but not knowing the full extent, began to notice small acts of care, a shadow that followed her without being threatening, a letter left anonymously at her apartment, a quiet presence at the cafe that ensured her safety. As the days passed, their conversations became more frequent, though always careful. Dorian learned her story in small fragments, her childhood, her dreams, the struggles she had overcome to care for others. Ilara began to sense that beneath Dorian's calm exterior, there was a man burdened with responsibility, with a past full of weight and consequence. One evening, he invited her to his estate. She hesitated but sensed an unspoken trust in his words. When she arrived, the mansion loomed like a fortress against the dark sky. Inside it was warm, the firelight dancing across polished floors and high ceilings. Dorian led her to a quiet room overlooking the harbor. Why am I here? She asked softly. To understand, Dorian said simply, and to show you that not everything in my world is danger. Some parts can be safe, can be calm. She looked around, unsure whether to trust him fully, but his presence was reassuring, a constant in a life that had often been uncertain. It is beautiful, she said quietly. Not as beautiful as the person I brought here, he said, almost without thinking. His words startled him as much as they startled her. He had not intended to speak them aloud. Ilara's eyes widened slightly, but she did not look away. Instead, she signed something softly. I trust you. Dorian watched her hands move, a mix of awe and tenderness in his expression. He realized that trust was a fragile gift, one that she had offered freely, and it moved him more than he expected. Days turned into weeks, and their bond deepened. Dorian's world, full of shadows and danger, began to change in subtle ways. He found himself thinking less about enemies and more about her. He watched her laugh with his mother, saw her care for others, and felt a warmth that had long been absent from his life. Yet danger never truly left. Rival factions, sensing Dorian's distraction, began to move, testing his empire. Ilara became a potential target, not for her own deeds, but because of her connection to him. One night, a masked figure appeared near her apartment, intent clear in the way he moved. Dorian was already there, silent as the shadows, and intervened before any harm could reach her. The confrontation was swift. Dorian's presence, a mix of skill and authority, ended the threat without a fight lasting more than moments. Ilara watched, a mixture of fear and admiration in her eyes. You see why I said you must be protected, he said quietly afterward. I understand, she whispered, but I do not want to live in fear. You will not, he said firmly. Not with me. I will not let fear control you. The incident marked a turning point. Ilara began to see Dorian not just as a protector, but as someone who could be trusted, someone who could be part of her life. And Dorian, in turn, allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in years, something beyond duty, beyond protection. He allowed himself to hope. One afternoon, as they sat in the estate's garden, Isolde approached them. She smiled gently at Ilara, reaching out to take her hand. Thank you for being here. She signed, her movements slow but deliberate. You bring joy to this house. To him. Alara's eyes filled with warmth. She nodded, signing back. I care for him too. Dorian watched this exchange, a soft smile tugging at his lips. The bond between his mother and Ilara was strong, a testament to the kindness that had first drawn him to the Waitress. He realized then that family could be chosen, that connections could be built even in the most unlikely of circumstances. The following weeks were filled with quiet moments, laughter, and small gestures of care. Dorian learned to soften, to let someone into his world without losing control. Ilara learned courage, not only in trusting him but in standing beside him as challenges arose. Together they faced threats small and large, always emerging stronger. And then, one evening, as the city slept under a silver moon, Dorian and Ilara stood on the balcony of the estate overlooking the harbor. The mist swirled below, lights reflecting faintly in the water. Dorian took her hand gently, holding it with care, and said softly, I never thought I could feel this way. About anyone. Ilara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both trust and affection. Neither did I, she whispered. But now, I do. They stood in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Danger still existed always, but it no longer defined them. They had chosen trust, courage, and connection. They had chosen each other. Dorian leaned slightly closer, his forehead touching hers. Whatever comes, he said quietly, I will protect you, always. Ilara smiled softly, signing a single word, always. The mist shifted around them, the harbor below calm yet alive, and for the first time, Dorian allowed himself to believe that love, even in a world of shadows, could be safe, that bonds could be strong enough to endure danger. That trust could transform hearts, and in that quiet, moonlit moment, two souls found not only protection, but redemption and a future filled with hope. The city continued beneath them, full of shadows and whispers, but for Dorian and Ilara, a new chapter had begun, one of courage, trust, and love that would guide them through whatever challenges the world might send.